Okay, so let's start. I would like you to have a look at the core syllabus. Have you found it? It's in the file in the team here. If you look at the schedule, this is the first class, right? On there was a bit of misunderstanding, so the time has to be changed a bit in terms of date, because initially I thought that we're gonna have this class on Monday, but it turns out it is on Thursday, right? Okay. So first question first. Are you all happy with this time slot, or you would like to change it? Because I can do Monday morning as well, 10 to 12, if that fits you better.
For me, I have another class on Monday morning, so this time slot is okay for me.
Okay. All right. No worries. No worries. Okay. So let's stick with this time then. Okay, so just look at the syllabus together, and we're gonna. I don't think I put it here. No. Okay. How can I share this? All right. If you look at the syllabus here, I mean, just ignore the date for now. You're gonna see that we're gonna learn quite a few topics in this particular subject of trade competition law. Most of them will be case discussion. Okay. And the main reason is because I do have this I do have these lectures, especially the latter part record already, and I uploaded it on YouTube. I'm gonna send over the link again, but what I would really encourage you is to have a look at them, and even if in these classes, like earlier classes that we're gonna talk about it, I would really encourage you to at least try to learn them, sort of the basic idea, because I already put the main textbooks that I will use in the course syllabus and also in the slides already. As we're gonna cover some sort of like basic microeconomics. That's gonna be the next class, okay? And then we'll study probably the most important thing that you will use in practice when you pursue cases, especially in competition. This thing is so important. Whether you will win the case or lose the case, it actually goes down to this thing, which is pretty much what we call market definition. How would you draw the market and talk about a particular market and say that, okay, we are having this market power or not? So this is so important, and that is the reason why I spend so many hours on it, essentially 2 lectures, market and market power. And we can discuss 2 cases, not 2 cases, but 2 lectures focusing on the case discussion, the vertical restraints and horizontal restraints. That's going to be the 5th and the 6th class. And before midterm week, we won't have a midterm exam anyway. I'm gonna give a lecture on this merger, horizontal merger, which is extremely interesting. You've seen in the news, especially in the past 12 months, there are so many cases, interesting cases. In Thailand, we have this taste Collusion. Let's discuss it. I'm going to tell you how to approach this particular case and what is the right way to have a look at it. And then after midterm, we're going to discuss cases involving this horizontal merger. Okay. And then I'm going to give a lecture on this vertical and conglomerate mergers. And for the remaining 3 classes, we're going to have case discussions on vertical and conglomerate mergers, which is pretty much correspond to the 10th to the 10th class, which it was one vertical and conglomerate. And on the 12th and the 13th, we're gonna discuss cases in abusive dominance and unfair trade practice. Okay. The last two classes, we're gonna have guest speakers. I will be inviting on 19th of April. It will be Dr. Pacharasut or Dr. Pacharasut from Faculty of Economics. We will talk about how you do this sort of competition analysis in practice. Okay, when you pursue cases, especially in competition, what you really need to do is almost unavoidable as a lawyer. You would have to work side by side with economists, and he's going to tell the story about how you actually start thinking about this case at all, and what is the roles of lawyer and economist, and how they can actually synergize their specialties in order to work on a particular case. And on the 26th is going to be a partner from the Abusive. I believe that most of you would have heard of the firm's name already, or maybe some of you have had a sort of training or internship at the Abusive. I will be inviting Kun Pim, who is a partner working specifically in this area of competition law, to tell you about how we actually do this sort of competition case in practice. Okay, so that's pretty much the whole structure. And the format will be this. Any questions so far?
Sorry for interrupting. อาจารย์หยกครับคือ some friends are trying to join the meeting and they said they have already sent you a request, but you didn't.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for letting me know. So any question on the structure, any suggestions in the meantime? No? Nice. Okay. I have admitted them already. Let's talk about structure. Okay, so that's pretty much the things that we will hopefully cover. The format, I mean, for the lecture, straightforward. I'm gonna have some slides and tell you about things. But for the case, I would expect you to read and to find a case first. Okay. Now I'm seeing 15 of you. But for the registration, I believe it was just 11 or 12 of you. So does it mean that more of you will be signing? Or you're just sitting in to observe? That's the question.
But is that possible to sit in this class?
Sure, I don't mind. But the thing is, if you would like to sit in, I might probably ask you to participate as well, especially when we do this sort of case discussion. But I don't mind if you would be sitting in. Yeah. Okay. So the thing is, I would expect that you would form a group of 3 to 4 students. Okay, and in these classes where the format says case, essentially what we're going to do is for that particular topic, for example, on the 5th week, we would discuss vertical restraints. So what I asked you is to find like real world cases on that particular topic. You could find it from competition commission websites like OTCC of Thailand, CCCS of Singapore, ZMA of UK, right, or FTA of the US, or any other countries if you can find, or you can find cases from book or other materials. Doesn't really matter, but I would recommend you to find it from the kind of commission websites because you will have like more detail there, and each group is required to at least sort of make some conclusions, okay, make some points, and I would like you to be focusing on sort of like the background of the industry, okay, which industry are we talking about, how many firms are there, or who are the main players within this particular industry, which is mentioned in a particular case, and how firms and commission draw this market definition. For now, you're still sort of, the idea is still blurry to you, right? Like what exactly is market definition, but we're going to cover that first before the first case discussion session, which is, we're going to cover a lot of them actually on the third and the fourth class. Okay, and then when you discuss the background, discuss the market definition, how they draw the market. Okay, which market that are we I mean the commissioners or the government authority was pretty much investigating, and the third one is the issue related to law and subordinate rules. You can refer to the Thailand Trade Competition Act as well, and you see like which article that this case is considering, and then you conclude it with a verdict. Right? In order to make a discussion at least fruitful, I would need you to send over the case and also your piece of conclusion to me and also your friends on Friday before the lecture on Monday. But this is going to be shift, right? Because now we are having lecture on Thursday, so it would be nice if you can send over the case and also the conclusion by Monday. Okay, so at least we have 2 days in advance to have a look at it and to come up with some good questions or points of discussion. And we're going to discuss each case for roughly 25 to 30 minutes. I expect that there will be 4 groups of you, and that's actually the reason why I asked the number of students to be precise. If you have 12, then probably we will discuss 4 cases, and that would use up our 2-hour lecture. Okay. Yeah, in this case, I think we're going to have 4 cases a day. Okay, so just when you comment in this case section, I would expect that we should at least have some sort of background knowledge, and you could make a very brief presentation for say 10 or 15 minutes, or even less than that, about these 4 points. Okay, and then we discuss afterwards. I would point out like, okay, what do you think? You think if you are pursuing the case, if you are a lawyer of this side, would you be able to draw the market definition differently? What sort of evidence would you need in order to support the point that probably your client is not that big, or your client is big but not conducting anything illegally, right? That sort of discussion would be really useful because it's something that you need to pursue in reality anyway. Okay. Any questions so far about a case discussion?
I would like to ask in which format you want the conclusion of the case to be sent, like just a document?
What do you mean? I'm sorry. You like a word or what?
Yes, like a word or a point.
I mean, I don't mind. I mean, you could do it in any format that suit. You can do it in Word. in which you would have sort of these 4 topics, and you just type the details afterwards as well, or you can do it in PowerPoint as well. So when you discuss it, you can actually share your slide and let us or your friends and me have a look at it as well. So yeah, I don't mind the format.
Thank you.
Oh, so maybe you want, I mean, sending via email is actually quite a good way to do that. What I would like to ask you is probably you can create a folder. I think you're allowed, right? Can one of you try to create a folder in the file and see if you can drop any file in it? Because if that is the case, then it might be quite convenient to share your file with your friends, and I can actually come back to you later.
I'll try.
Yeah, thank you. Also, a bit of logistic. I think the easiest way to reach you guys is what? Line? Or if Line it is, then would you mind creating a Line group and add me, or you post the QR code and I'll join. All right.
Okay.
Okay, and the final report, which is account for 60 points. Okay, I would like you to find a problem. I would like you to find a problem in current competition act, and write out the suggestions for the improvement. Well, the best way that I would recommend you to do is to interview. You should interview, it could be either practitioners, policymakers, academics, commissioners, or anyone that you can come up with, and you think that person would be able to tell you what the problems are, or what areas in this particular act or the implementation of it that could be improved. Okay, and then you state the problem and the rationale behind it. Right. Preferably it should be evidence-based in the sense that you sort of come up with the idea that, okay, if this is ongoing, these sort of cases will pretty much slip. Okay, or this approach, this sort of announcement, this sub-regulation is actually defying these theories, and it would create more adverse consequences rather than constructive consequences. Or you say that this is the way the foreign laws say about this sort of abuse of dominance, right? But this is what we say about it, and you can actually point out that well, our way, our approach has some flaws, and these flaws are quite dangerous, so probably we need to fill out a gap. That's possible as well. And eventually you suggest solutions like, okay, we should amend the act this particular way in order to solve these problems. Okay, quite straightforward, right? It should be no longer than 30 pages of A4, okay? Including everything, all inclusive, except bibliography or reference. Is that clear? The deadline is down there. The 7th of, I'm not sure, May.
This is also in a group of 3 or 4 as well.
This will be individual.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It will be individual. But that case thing is going to be in group.
Oh, and I just create a file in the Microsoft team.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have in next week, if we have to drop in any cases, everyone can drop it in the file named cases.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you might want to have these sort of subfolders, right? Like named after each section, like vertical restraint, folder, and horizontal restraints.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Okay. So that's pretty much all the logistics. Any question or suggestion?
That's on for the group assignments. It's a weekly work, right?
Yeah.
And is it a subject matter of the research? Like, are you going to give us a subject matter or like a specific point on what to research on, or is it something we can just go ahead and look into any area we're interested in?
Oh, you mean the final report, or you mean
the cases?
Oh, the case is quite free. Pretty much, you will know subject matters like a big picture of it, right? Because for example, this case, like on the 5th week, you know that it's about vertical restraints, and the presumption here is you have watched the lecture already, right? Because I posted online, so you have sort of basic understanding of the topic already, and you just find cases that are relevant to this vertical restraints.
Okay, so the cases will be based on our discussion on Friday.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it's for that purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because yeah, essentially this case down here is essentially the case here. I'm just elaborating down here.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay, yeah, thanks for asking.
Welcome.
All right, Claire, anything? Okay, good. If you have any questions, just ask me later then. So today the lecture would be on the would be on this introduction, right? And so let me just begin with a very simple question. Why do we need competition law? I mean, why? Why do we need competition? There's no wrong answer. I mean, the presumption here is you never heard of competition law before. This is the first time ever. And someone say that, yeah, actually we should have this competition law, so the firm will compete. So essentially, another version of this question is like, why do you want firms to compete? What's good in it?
To prevent monopoly.
Prevent monopoly, yeah. Oh, so can I ask a subsequent question is, what is bad about monopoly?
Monopoly will the only seller will influence the price.
So they do whatever they want to do, right? Okay, but why do we let them do it? Because I mean, we could just not buy, right? So what's wrong with it? I mean, you are a monopoly, say you're a single business, and we can just say, okay, we don't buy your product if you do not reduce the price. Can we do that?
Well, essentially, if you have no other competitors, we'll eventually have to buy from that one monopoly.
But
choices.
So you don't have choice, right? But what if I'm sort of observing the situation and I feel like, yeah, suppose that the product we're talking about is, say, pork, okay, and you say that the seller of pork is a monopolist, okay, and you're observing it and you feel like, oh, this guy is actually the only one in the market who's running this pork selling business. Then I think I should set up my farm as well, and I should actually sell pork because it's really profitable, right? Because as a monopoly, what you do is you increase the price as much as you can. Not really as much as you can, literally, but you would increase the price at a very high level so that you would be so profitable. And if you have that much profit, what I can do is actually I can set up my own business as well, and I undercut your price. So there's nothing bad about it, right? Why do we need law? Because I will see the opportunity, you will see the opportunity, you will enter the market anyway. What's wrong with it?
But if you want to start your business, I think you will have you will have less resource than the large company, I think.
Okay, so you say that is this a sort of unfair starting point, right? Is it, what sometimes you call it like an even level playing field, right? Because we are starting from a very ground up, like from green field, but that incumbent is actually starting from a very good position. They have all this investment in place already. They have developed their reputation already. So that is something that to catch up, right? Certain distance apart. But you can probably do something else as well, right? To support these newcomers. You can subsidize newcomers. So, but yeah, I mean, okay, thanks for all the answers. All of them are valid. What I'm trying to sort of point out is you can see the sort of dynamic, right? That well, if you let everything work, you let the market solve its own problem, sometimes you're gonna run into this sort of what they call market failure, right? Because when you have a one big player, especially in industries where the investment, the initial investment is really high, it basically means that I couldn't do that because how would I get the money, right? How would I get sufficient money to make this sort of initial lump sum investment in order to be able to compete against a bigger player, right? And I mean, let alone the difficulties of catching up with all this reputation, and also I mean, if you take into account all the standards and regulations that would they would essentially impose like a huge amount of another set of costs. So there's so many sort of like barriers, right, between and along the way, right, between coming in the market and becoming an established player in the market. So I think essentially, you know, that you want sort of this sort of regulations in order to control the way that players within the market are interacting against each other, and also regulating the way in which new players or new entrants could actually enter the market. Okay, otherwise the consequence is quite clear, right? We as consumers would have that much choice, okay? But also as an entrepreneur as well, if we would like to set up our own business, it is if you do not really accommodate competition in the market, smaller players will not be able to enter the market or start their own business, right? So and eventually the wealth within a particular country would be so concentrated. It would be so concentrated among a very tiny group of people. And you know the consequence of it as well, right? It's not just about business, but it will lead to inequality. And that is actually a problem that's ongoing everywhere in the world, not just in Thailand, in the US, in Europe. Inequality is getting worse and worse. And the very, very scary consequence of inequality is that people at the top who owns this sort of like monopoly power would also be able to influence policies, right? They can influence these policy makers, politicians, and eventually the whole system will be curbed to sort of provide preference to them. And that is really bad. That is sometimes technically we call it the crony capitalism, right? And having that system in place, the inequality would get even worse and worse. And the regulation and all social structure would benefit the rich, right? And the gap between the rich and the poor would be even further and further. And that is bad for everyone. That is bad for everyone, even the rich one. Because eventually when they produce some products, right, they're running business. They need to sell products to someone, right? It doesn't matter if you produce like pork, poultry, any consumers goods. People who would buy your products are the poor, right? But if the poor are getting poorer and poorer, what would happen is they would not have purchasing power to purchase your product, and eventually the system would collapse. And that is the famous prediction of Karl Marx, right? So competition law is, to me, it's not just about like having firms competing against each other, but it's actually a very root of so many social problems, right? Another bad thing is, if you think about this, is when these corporates are so influential in politics, the policy, especially say, for example, tax policy, would be hugely influenced by them as well. They don't want to pay that much tax, right? And this is actually one of the things that Trump has been pursuing so aggressively, reducing tax for corporate to be really low. And Biden is promising that I'm gonna push that up, right? I'm gonna charge them more. But what happened there is this: if you have some very big firms who are closely linked with politicians or the government, when you need to stimulate the economy, you would stimulate in such a way that you would stimulate demand. You would sort of like encourage people to spend more. And you know that household debt now is really high, right? It's almost 80% of the GDP already, and this is like historically high, which basically means that households, and this is a number for Thailand, households in Thailand most of them are in debt. And people went bankrupt so earlier in their career. The average of these bankrupts is now pretty much like 30-ish, less than 40, and getting younger and younger. You imagine a country where people get bankrupt really, really early in their career or their lives. That is bad, right? That is quite a catastrophe. So I think the problem is so widespread, and it's not just limited to the way the firms interact with each other, or we consumers don't have choice, but it is huge. All right, so I'm just trying to say why this subject is super important. Okay. Any question or any point to discuss?
Oh, that's perfectly clear.
Okay, thank you. All right. So today, this is actually the outlines of the whole course. All right, we're gonna learn the sort of like introduction to competition. References, I uploaded all these textbooks in the folder, the files, the textbooks already. So have a look at them. This motto one is quite good. I like it. It has a good sort of like a right level mixture between law and economics. Highly recommend it. It's a bit old, but the theory and the idea are still very much applicable to nowadays usage. Okay, Wish and Bailey. This book is essentially quite focused on Europe. Okay, motto is Europe oriented as well, but they do have like more sort of like perspectives from elsewhere, like in the US and also Asia as well, which is not bad, but it's particularly for the Europeans. The run of the fold, in the run of the chapters, sorry, follow strictly the articles in European Commission Competition Law. Good to read. If some concepts are a bit unclear, you might want to have a look at the industrial organization, which is the you can call it economic twin of competition law. When you study in economics, it is called industrial organization. Okay, and all other things are good to read if you have time. Okay, these case studies and final assignments are clear. Okay, today let's have a quick tour of the Thailand Competition Act, which here stands for TCA. We're going to come back to this act from time to time anyway, because when you do this sort of case analysis of the lecture, at the end of the lecture, I would like to I would try to sort of link between the theoretical knowledge and also empirical evidence elsewhere to the way that we enact the law. Okay. Luckily, we are starting to have more and more cases in Thailand, and that's going to be useful. That, especially the merger model here is quite unique. It's quite different from elsewhere. And some principles to bear in mind. We're going to discuss what exactly competition is. Right? There are so many definitions of competition. And I actually just went to OTCC yesterday, and I talked to people there, and I said, one thing that you really need to do first is you have to set these two things straight. Okay, one thing is, what do you mean by competition? What sort of competition is preferable? And the second thing is, what is your objectives? You're going to see that there are so many objectives. Okay. If you say that I don't care about competition, I want a firm within country to be so huge, and the government will control the behavior of it, it could be one alternative as well. And it's actually used in so many countries in the past. Because competition is the tool, right? You use it to achieve some particular objective. You might say that I don't need that much competition because eventually I want to have one big firm in my country who is growing without any constraint, without any competitive force. And that firm would be my what we call national champion to compete against firms abroad. That is valid as well, and that depends on your objectives, right? So you say that you're not focusing on competition domestically, you will be focusing on the global scale and ensure that your firms will be able to compete abroad. That is valid as well. You can do whatever you want, but just to be sure that you know what you are doing. And a bit of economics. I think this thing will be essentially discussed next time. Okay, when I teach microeconomics, it's so important. And dynamical competition law. This thing is probably I won't cover it, but I would strongly encourage you to have a look at this article by Kovacic. He reviewed like a century development of antitrust in the US. I think the main message that you would get from this article is that throughout history, the idea of implementing competition law have changed dramatically from time to time. Okay. You're starting with trying to weaken larger players, right? And then eventually you say that, oh, at this point, I think we need to promote some firms, especially after the Great Crisis in 1930, which was a global crisis, and it's probably now second to this pandemic crisis in terms of economy. But during the time, there was a concept that, oh, actually, we should not really promote too intense competition, otherwise people would just cut throat and everyone will die. So we should actually lower the level of competition and promote this sort of like collaboration between firms, or you probably have to let some firms survive while give up some other firms who are weaker. Yeah, that's possible, right? And during the time. So I think that's a key message you will get from that article. Okay. Thailand's Competition Act 2017. The first thing is who falls under this act. Well, one idea is this. This act, the entity, this is so important. Okay, in practice, this is something that is very, I think in the modern corporate world, this idea has been widespreading quite quickly. So it's not a firm, okay? It's not a firm as a juristic person who is the subject of this particular act, but it is this concept of single business entity. We're going to cover this further later, but imagine that if you have like a firm, right, and you don't want your firm to be too big, for example, you can actually, what you can do is you can divest your firms into smaller firms, and you say that, oh, you look at each firm, this is just tiny bit. But if you still have sort of this control, direct control of sort of like this, well, asset relationship, or if you are owning some equity of that smaller firms, well, essentially it basically means that you are still within the same entity, right? Because you can still control these smaller firms, even though they are sort of separated juristic persons. But this particular act will look at them as just one entity, which is called single business entity. Okay, that have this sort of like chain of command of asset relationship. Okay, and so we call this business operators. This is the legal term. Okay, business operator. It doesn't matter if you are operating in which industry. Okay, unless, this is important, unless your own industry has a specific regulator. The question is this: can you come up with the name of the industry that is regulated by its own regulator? Can you come up with some? There's so many.
Financial institutions.
Yeah, and this is regulated by
The Bank of Thailand.
Yeah, Bank of Thailand, BOT, right? What else? Any other industries? Just give me one more, and then I'll go. Yep.
Petroleum. Like oil company, something like that.
Yeah, it's gonna be regulated by ERC, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Okay, yeah, there's so many. All right, ERC, BOT, insurance industry as well. But be careful because you could be regulated. But if you don't have a competition law within that sphere, you would be under this Competition Act, so to Thailand, the big one anyway, right? You could be regulated in some other areas like there's operations, standards, but there is no sort of dedicated competition law to govern your industry, then you would be regulated by the Thailand Competition Act anyway. All right. So essentially, you could be anyone to be qualified as a business operator, right? You could be a vendor, you could be a producer, you could be the person who places an order or import products for sale. You can be an importer, right? You can be a buyer for production or resale of goods as well. You can be service providers. So it doesn't matter, right? So you can be anyone who is actually operating, okay, the business. Well, there are some exceptions. Certainly, if you are central, regional, or local administrator, you will be exempt from the enforcement of this Thailand Competition Act. If you are the state-owned enterprise or public organization or government agencies, but not in all cases, right? Only if you are running your activities to sort of like achieve objectives in the following topics, okay? National security, public interest, society interest, and provision of public utilities, right? You would fall out of the scope here, and the TCA won't really be enforcing. But if you are a state-owned enterprise who are competing, running the business against private businesses, then in that case, you fall under Trade Competition Act, right? For example, if you are an oil company who is selling coffee, then definitely that's something you do so to compete against private companies. Even if you are, say, state-owned enterprise, then maybe you would need to be complying with Trade Competition Act. All right, this is something we talk about already. This is pretty much an exception for farmers group cooperatives because and if they are doing to I mean their objectives, the founding objectives are to serve farmers. So that is you don't have to fall under this Competition Act, right? In Thai we call it Sahakon Kan Ksait, that sort of thing. Okay, so that's pretty much the structure, and not this. It's the structure of the law, but let's talk about 4 things. All right, 4 main things that this law covers. The first is the abuse of market power. Well, we're going to come back to this anyway, but let me tell you this sort of concept briefly. So we talk about competition. One thing is this. We want to control conduct, right? We don't, I mean, for example, we discussed this monopoly, and you say that, yeah, monopoly could do this, monopoly could do that. Well, sometimes if you're big, it doesn't mean that you might be doing something wrong, okay? You could be a kind giant as well. If you are, well, if you are big, doesn't mean that you are wrong, all right? That's the bottom line. But if you are big, it is more likely that you would abuse your own size, your own power, because you're in a position to do anything you like in the market, because people don't have alternative, right? You can increase the price, you can do whatever you like, people won't have choice, because if you're small and you just increase the price, we would just say, I don't give a shit, I would just switch to buy from someone else, right? But if you're big, then people don't have choice, and now you have this sort of market power. So by having a look at this sort of like structure, like, okay, this industry or this market is so concentrated. You have just only one player. You have just really just a few players. This sort of approach is called what you look at the structure. All right, you look at the structure, and when you look at the structure, you know that, okay, if there are so many players within this market, you could be, well, sort of you don't really have to follow these players closely, right? Because the market force will take care of itself. If any one of them is not doing well, they will just go out of business. If any one of them try to increase the price, either will undercut. This sort of market mechanism will take care of itself, right? But some particular markets that you have just a few players, or it's just so difficult for outsiders, right? For the newcomers to beat the incumbents. That is probably somewhere that you should keep close eye on. And that is the structural approach. Okay, you start from structure, you look at the market where the problems could lie, right? And that structure may or may not lead to the conduct, right? You can be big, but you probably want to exercise your market power for some reason. That's okay, right? There's nothing wrong here. But there are so many cases as well that you are probably, you are not that big, but you could exercise certain level of market power. Say you have a few players within that market, right? Say like the telco industry, the mobile phone industry, where you have just a few service providers here in Thailand, right? AIS, True, DTAC, that's it, right? A few smaller players as well, but in this case, you sort of like feel, yeah, because of the scale, there are just a few players here. It is possible that one of them might be able to exercise certain level of market power. This is true that they cannot do things arbitrarily, because if, say, DTAC increase the rate like arbitrarily, essentially we would just switch, right? We would just switch to actually, telco is another industry which has its own competition law, right? Kosotoshaw is regulating this industry. So that is sort of structure. But if it is something like in the middle where you cannot say that, okay, there's only one player, or there's just a few players, then you will move on to talk about conduct, right? The structure is so concentrated, the structure is so difficult to enter, might cause some problem because these players could exercise some bad conducts, right? And that is something you don't want to have in the market. You don't want them to exercise their market power in a detrimental way. You don't want it to increase the price arbitrarily. You don't want them to reduce the quality. You don't want them to block some sellers from selling the product and give preference to the sellers that have this sort of like connection with them, right? So that's a sort of conduct that you want to control. So you have to separate between these two. And if you look at this abuse of market power, this thing is essentially the case where you have some big players, right? You have some big players. Sometimes we call this a market dominance. Sometimes you call it a monopoly. A monopoly is essentially one person can do anything arbitrarily, anything in that sense of like increasing the price arbitrarily, reduce the quality because people don't have choice, right? If they abuse it, they have this market power and they abuse it, then you would fall under the enforcement of this Competition Act, right? If you merge, this is pretty much the case that you change the structure, right? You remember the two things, structure and conduct. If you merge, it means that now, okay, initially, it could be the case that you have quite a few players, or maybe you have two big players who are fighting shoulder to shoulder. And you essentially, so that there are so many industries where you actually need just two players, right? Say the plane builder, right? The plane building industry, you have Airbus and Boeing. Because of the scale of the industry, the cost, the structure of it, you can't. I mean, physically you can't have that many players because I mean plane building is so well it takes years and the investment is huge and the volume of the transaction is quite sporadic, so you can't really have that many players. You need scale in order to be profitable. All right, but suppose these two merge, then that is the change in the structure already, which means that okay, if you merge and you change the structure and the market, it is natural, right, that when you merge you have less player, and when you merge you have a bigger player in the market, then that could cause a problem. So essentially when you have these merger acquisitions in the market, then you have fewer players, you have a player that is getting more influential, having more market power, who potentially would conduct badly. So in that case, you would keep an eye on it as well. This is merger, right? The third is collusion. Collusion is essentially where it's quite similar to merge, but you imagine these firms who are still independent. You can call them business operators as well, because if you consider the unit of analysis here, it's not firms. But sometimes I would just use these two words interchangeably, okay, like firms and business operators. But please understand that I'm talking about a single business entity. Collusion is here. Collusion is the idea that when you have sort of these different firms and they are not merging or they're not getting consolidated to become a single firms, but they agree amongst themselves to fix something, right? So for example, if you have two firms competing, well, one firm would essentially undercut the price or try to improve the quality of the product, right? Or if you say okay, let's come up with an example to make it so clear. If you are selling, what do you want to sell? I mean, can you give me an example of a product that you want to sell?
Coffee.
Coffee, okay, yes. If you want to sell coffee, you want to open this coffee shop, and what can you agree with your competitors? Usually, what you do is okay. Your location is you just build a coffee shop in Bang Na area, right? But you can compete is okay. I'm gonna be right next to you. Say I'm gonna be right next to you. I'm gonna compete with you, and I'm gonna charge my price slightly lower. So consumers will feel that this coffee shop sells cheaper coffee. I'm gonna beat you in terms of quality, right? That sort of competition will occur in the sense that you try to be at the same place to approach as many consumers as possible, undercut the price, and improve the quality. This is something that you can do, and eventually we as consumers would just basically enjoy the benefits of these things, right, of this competition. But suppose that you collude and say, so these parameters are essentially what you can collude, right? You can say that, okay, let's fix the price. Let's fix the price at 150 baht for the grand day, right? And let's do that. So we don't have this price difference. Or you can say that, yeah, I know that your quality is slightly different than me. So let's say that we're going to keep the gap of our prices to be 10 baht. We're going to keep it there because, I'm going to be a bit cheaper than you because the quality of my coffee beans is slightly worse. So people would, but I don't want to change my price too much. Otherwise, people would just switch to me. Right? That could be collusion as well. So these parameters, this price, this quality, these I could say something like this as well. I don't want to compete against you. I want to build a shop near the shop that you just built, right? I would go to the other side of Bangkok, but you have to promise that you will not build. your chain store next to mine. So you be on the east of Bangkok, I'm going to the west of Bangkok. This is what you call a market allocation. And this is considered collusion as well. All right? And the last thing is unfair practices. Unfair practices is essentially this.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Collusion what is referred to in Thai as หัว
Yeah.
Like มันคือการหัวใช่ไหมคะ
Yes, it is หัว.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of which, there's another kind of collusion that essentially we are more familiar with the word หัว. It's the หัวประมูล. Right? Bid rigging when you go to any bidding and you agree with your say another auctioneers that you're gonna bid, you agree with the other bidders and say that okay, for this time I'm gonna bid slightly cheaper than this level. Say the announced price is like $1 million baht. I'm gonna bid at 900,000 baht, and you guys just beat me slightly, okay? You guys just beat me slightly, so I will win this bidding. But for the next time, I will surrender, right? I will bid slightly higher than you. This sort of bid rigging could happen as well, and that is considered collusion. Okay. You can agree on some other things as well, and that would be another sort of like if you agreed on sort of on price, but amongst like non-competitors. But that is possible as well. If you are suppliers and you agree with your seller that this is going to be the level of price that you sell, and so that if that is the case, then I will be able to sell to you a bit more, and I can actually negotiate with other sellers. Yeah, that sort of thing could happen as well, or you can sort of agree upon this sort of quality. But as you can see, it's quite difficult to sustain, right? Because in the latter case, when you are not competitors and you agree upon some parameters like price or quality or whatever or allocation, that will not affect because you know that there are so many other competitors out there who have nothing to do with your agreement. And if you would like to have a look at the act, there are two kinds of this collusion. The hardcore one, which is pretty much the agreement between the collusion between competitors. That one is criminalized as well, and it's in the Article 54. Okay, but in the Article 55, it's going to be the softcore cartel, where you basically it's an agreement amongst non-competitors or competitors in different markets, right? Yeah, that could be the case. And the last one is unfair practices, which is it's sort of like a safety net of competition commission, because this covers so many practices that are unfair. Well, in some cases you might not have market power, but you have this bargaining power, right? Say you are a sole supplier of this particular seller or retailer, so now you have a great bargaining power, even though you are not the sole suppliers, right? And this retailer is say have been is sort of like binding by your contract, the long-term contract, and this retailer cannot switch to some other suppliers, then you abuse this sort of bargaining power to treat your competitor unfairly, or you use this sort of like fake news, or you use this sort of like marketing campaign that is evil in order to beat your competitors. That could be unfair practice as well, right? Or maybe if you are say you are running this sort of like food delivery platform, and you are dealing with restaurants. This is actually ongoing in this case. You're dealing with the restaurants, right? And you talk to them that, okay, if you join this campaign, I'm gonna give you, I'm gonna charge you slightly lower, right? I'm gonna charge you this slightly lower, but what you need to do is you won't sign any such similar contract with my competitors. But if you sign just a typical contract, then that's fine. In this case, it's probably not an unfair practice, but if you sort of force to sign just one type of contract, then that could be what we call the exclusive, right? Exclusive case. And that case could lead to these unfair practices as well. Okay, so you see here that we are talking about this sort of like you beg and you abuse it, right? You merge, and that could raise the red flag because now you will become more powerful. Or you are still independent business entities, but you agree upon something in order to lessen competition, right? Or you are treating your competitors or other people in the supply chain in an unfair way. These sort of things are the things that our Trade Competition Act are trying to cover. Right? Okay. Any questions so far? I won't go into detail this time, but you see here that we have this abuse of market power, right? You abuse pricing, you set condition on trade partners, you control quality, or you intervene in other firms' business because you have market power and you say that we have to do this, you have to set these conditions, you cannot sell to that one, right? That sort of thing, because other would have to listen to you because you are the one who has the market power. Okay. Merger. There are two cases of merger here. If you merge and you are not that big, say that you don't have market share greater than 50%. This is not for example, but under the law. But your sales last year exceeds 1,000 baht. Sorry, billion baht. In that case, probably if you merge with someone, you would have to do this post-merger notification 7 days after closing the deal. But if you will become a market dominant player or even a monopoly, the market dominance, okay, quickly, is that post-merger, your entity would have market share greater than 50%, or you are one of the top 3 players whose market shares combined greater than 75%. Well, don't worry about it. We come back to that, okay? In that case, and you have this market share greater than 10%, and your sale is greater than billion baht. In that case, you have to ask for, it's not notification, sorry, it should be approval. Okay, you have to ask for the pre-merger approval. All right. And collusion. This is, as I said, you have the hardcore collusion and you have just typical collusion, okay, where you are non-competitor or you agree to sort of like reduce quality, or you have this sort of sole distributor or any fixing conditions in your terms of trade. We will go into detail later. Yeah, unfair trade practice, as I said, you unfairly restrict your competitors or other firms from practicing any business practice, or you exercise sort of bargaining power, or you fix your business conditions like sales. Okay, I'm going to sell just only this level of, I'm going to sell in bulk. If you don't want to buy from me, then I will not sell. That's sort of condition you can set, and if it's unfairly set, it will be considered unfair trade practices. All right, so that's a whole picture. And if you have a look at it, you will see that you could even make it even shorter. That the conduct that we are trying to control are these 2 sorts. All right, the first thing is exclusion. You're big and you try to kick someone out of the market, right? This is what we call exclusion, or you're competing against other firms and you're trying to exclude them from the competition or make them worse in terms of like their competitive capacity. That is exclusion. But another way is to collude, where you are still pretty much competitors, but you decide that you will not compete. So you decide to collude. That is an alternative approach. All right. And this is so important. in competition, there are two kinds of conducts. Okay, there are two kinds of conducts that, I mean, you categorize these two kinds by the way that the commission would consider whether this conduct should be prohibited or not. The first kind of thing is called per se. It's a per se rule, which say that whenever I found that you've done this, okay, whenever it is evidence that you say collude, I could find the evidence, I could find a record in the meeting, I could find a record of your phone call, and I now know that you collude. That thing would be called illegal per se, which basically means that you don't have to prove for the intention at all. Okay, whenever I found that you've done this, you'll be held liable. Okay, but another thing is what we call the rule of reason. Most of the case, for example, this is a merger, or you can merge and become a dominant player, but it doesn't mean that you are wrong. Okay, or say unfair practices, or even abuse of dominance in some other jurisdictions. They will use rule of reason. What it means is this: you probably have to prove. You have to prove that that particular conduct actually leads to efficiency or other benefits. And you have to be able to prove that that efficiency or benefits outweigh the consequence. You may reduce competition, yes. You may have some market power, yes. But by doing so, you actually gain something, right? And the economy as a whole also gains something as well. And those things that you would argue are these two, right? Because competition law is all about trading off between these two things, incentive and capability. Well, what it means is this: by increasing competition, right? By increasing competition, I would increase incentive, right? If I have more firms, they're competing against each other, then each firm within the market would have more incentive to compete, because I know that if my quality is lacking behind, my competitor will beat me. Consumers will switch to my competitor's products or services. And that's just pretty much the good side, the bright side of competition, where the more competition you have, the more incentive you provide, right? And that could come from entry or competition. I know that now I'm even though I am just one, like the only one player in the market, or suppose that I am just one of the 3 players in the market, and the competition, I mean, the other firms are probably not that sort of like active in terms of competition. But I know that if I'm sort of like shirking, some other firms would just enter the market and compete against me, because market entry is very easy, right? That is possible as well, especially in the industry where you can enter the market easily. For example, suppose that you are providing this sort of like tramp service, right? Tramp, which is the sort of like petroleum shipping service, okay? And if you provide a sort of maritime shipping service and you are running in the business, the thing is this: the entry is very easy, because if I'm someone who would like to run this sort of business as well, I would just buy a ship, right? I could buy a tramp, and then I could basically enter the market and operate my service as well. So that is the industry where the entry is quite easy. Okay. But the other side is that if you try to increase incentive by too much, it basically means that you will reduce capability as well. Because in some particular industry, you require scale. right? In order to be cost effective. You can think about it as like these electricity wires, right? Electricity wires here, like in Bangkok or anywhere in the world. If you allow so many competitors to run this business, and so say that the post in front of my house is like operated by one company, but the opposite is operated by another, then it is so inefficient, right? Because I mean, in order to be profitable and also to make it work, you really need it to be quite huge. Like it has to be sort of network of this sort of electricity system infrastructure. So that is the industry where you actually need the scale, right, in order to be cheaper per unit. So that is something that would be detriment by competition if you do not allow one player to be too big. Because there's so many industry where the fixed cost, it means that you have to operate this sort of infrastructure, you have to buy a huge machine, or you have to buy a huge sort of like vehicles to operate. And if you do not let them sell to so many players, or if you do not allow these operators to operate in a huge scale, well, pretty much the income will not be sufficient to make it profitable for them to survive. And well, we're going to cover this later, but there are so many industries where you need the scale in order to average this sort of fixed cost. Because if you sell to 10 people, then the cost would be just this sort of huge machine that you bought would be just separated between these 10 consumers. And it's going to outweigh like by miles the price that you get, right? And that makes you like you would acquire loss. But if you can sell to like 1,000 or you can produce in huge amount, then it's going to be cheaper per unit, because this fixed cost is like something that you have to pay anyway, right? You have to operate this anyway. And if you can sell to more players, so per head is going to be cheaper, and it is possible that you're going to be profitable. So that is what it means by scale. And scope is quite similar in the sense that you can adopt the resource for some other purposes as well, so that you can actually reuse the resource for some other activities. And in order to sell in so many areas, you need your firm to be larger as well. All right. Another thing that is so important is technology. Well, technology doesn't come from, well, you really need some resource in order to develop technology. You need to splash a huge amount of R&D, right, in order to invest on these technology development. And but in order to have that amount of money to develop your R&D, you need certain level of profit, right? And that bit of profit won't come if you have to compete so fiercely against your competitors. So this is natural. So by pushing too much competition, it is possible that you are now pushing down the level of capability of the firms inside the market. So that is the price that you have to pay. And the implementation of competition law is essentially the balance between these two forces. Right? Okay. Any questions so far?
Just one quick question.
Yep.
So, just to clarify, increased incentive will lead to increased competition?
I think it works both ways, right? You would have an incentive to develop yourself if you have competition, right? Because you have this sort of like competition, you know that you have to beat your competitors. So you have all incentives in the world to develop your product, to reduce the price, right?
Okay.
Yeah. But at the same time, when you push towards this competition, it means that you could harm the potential capability as well, because sometimes firms need to get large in order to be profitable, right? In order to reduce the cost per unit of production. This, okay, to make it very simple, it's like if you bought a machine, right? And this machine has to be, well, it has to be turned on all the time, and you have to pay for electricity anyway, regardless of whether you produce or not. For example, say that you have to pay this fixed cost. Doesn't matter how, you have to pay it anyway. That is why it's called fixed cost. We're going to cover this concept later on, but I just, let's assume that you have the company that you have to pay, or you can think of like you have to hire some workers and sign at least a short-term contract. That is fixed, right? Because you have to pay wages or salary every month, say. That is fixed. It doesn't matter how many products that you will produce. But suppose that you can sell just 10 pieces of product, then this cost would have to be pretty much borne by these 10 units of sales, right? But if you can sell to 1,000, well, we still have the same fixed cost, but now this fixed cost will be smaller per unit of your sales, because now you have 1,000 instead of 10, and unit cost will be lower, right? So that is what we mean by having these economies of scale. You're getting larger, the unit per cost is lower, because you can pretty much distribute the fixed cost among more products that you sell. All right? Okay, this picture is so important. This is like a very simple version of supply chain, but when we talk about horizontal or vertical, this is actually what it means. Horizontal means that the interaction happens between or among players who are actually competing at the same level. If you're a manufacturer and you're competing against other manufacturer, or you're a supplier and you are competing against other suppliers, that is horizontal, right? That's a horizontal relationship. If you merge, horizontal merger basically means that these two manufacturers merge between each other, all right? But vertical means that you are dealing along these value chains, right? And sometimes we call this upstream. And going down here direction we call downstream. Right? Downstream is pretty much going towards end consumers. Upstream basically means you go towards raw material suppliers. All right, that's the term that we're going to use essentially always in this particular subject. All right, clear? Mm-hmm. Right, SCP I think I covered already. The structure, conduct. The last one is performance, right? As I said, you have this sort of structure, a few players, more players, easy to entry or not. It's essentially that will sort of influence the ability of firms to conduct, to behave in certain ways, and eventually that would, if you are able to exercise your market power, it would be you would be able to enhance your performance as well. Say that your performance is the level of profit, right? So as this concept. Okay. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back. Right. Sorry, it was too warm. Okay, but by the way, do you have any point, or you would like me to explain anything further? to clarify your understanding. Is there any concept that is still unclear to you?
I think we're okay here.
Cool. All right. So let me go over this competition, right? Just to sort of point out that there are more than one. There's no consensus on what competition really mean. Okay, competition could mean differently to different people. Right, that's the first thing that you need to understand. But you can think about it as a struggle or contention for superiority, right? That is actually used by West and Bailey, the textbook that I mentioned earlier. If you look at it as sort of like you talk about a status quo, but someone call it as the process of rivalry, right? This is essentially the process. So you can think of competition as just like when you do something, you have to care about other players, right? When you do something, you have to care about your competitors or other firms. That is essentially the gist of competition. And if you have to care about the other firms, you have to care about your consumers more. That is essentially what competition aims to do, right? This guy, I think you've heard his name before, surely. His name is Adam Smith. He believed in what we call invisible hand, right? This is a famous sort of like piece of quote from him, saying that there's such a thing like invisible hand, where everyone is actually working or doing for their own benefits, but essentially that is the best thing that could happen to the society, right? And he believes, we will come back to the auction later, but he believes that by having these competitions, essentially, because I don't care about some other people, I'm not doing good for some other people. What I'm doing good, what I'm doing is actually, I want to maximize my profit. I want to maximize whatever I care about, okay? And all other economic agents in the society are actually doing the same. They're trying to sell the product to be as expensive as possible, but they also know that if they increase the price too high, then people will just switch to some other competitors. So I would be able to set the price just to a level that I still have demand, right? So and essentially what I can do is probably I try to reduce the cost, right? Because if I can produce it more cheaply, essentially I can reduce my price easier as well. So that would make me more capable of competing against competitors. But because I'm doing that, competitors would realize as well that they have to improve themselves, right? Some of them might be unable to do that because of their abilities, because of luck, or because of what. And they would exit the market and someone would come in. And essentially by having this process, you understand that only the best will survive, and firms would be so efficient, costs would be really low. And one tool by which costs could be lower is technology, right? The technology advancement would improve this production process and reduce the cost per unit. And consumers will gain as well. Now we buy these cell phones, these mobile phones at a very cheap price comparing to both in terms of quality and also in terms of price to the old days when the mobile phone is so bad and the price is so expensive, right? So this is a process would actually stimulate the economy and our well-being as a whole. So there's no one governing this process, right? It's pretty much competition in terms of like what Adam Smith believed. So there's this term of perfect competition. I just would like to put a caveat here that well, so many economists that you talk to will say something about perfect competition, because this is probably the first thing that they will learn in economics school. It's a situation in which you have so many small sellers, okay? Essentially, you have, well, small in the sense it means that there's no one seller or one player who is more influential or big enough to influence anything in the market. They sell homogeneous, essentially mean they sell the same product. A coffee would be a coffee, right? Exactly the same everywhere. It's this homogeneous product. Firms are price takers. Basically means, as what I said, you're a price taker when you have to look into the market and say, oh, the coffee beans price is a bag of coffee beans is say 500 baht per kg, and you cannot undercut the price because your cost is not that. I mean, if you undercut the price, other people would have undercut already, right? But essentially means that it's similar, not similar, but it's essentially equal to your cost level already. So you're a price taker in the sense that you look into the market and that is the price that you need to sell. Otherwise, you would want to be able to sell it, because if you sell a bit higher than that, nobody would buy this product from you because it's the same everywhere. If you sell it cheaper than that, you will be running out of business because it's already cheap, right? So you're a price taker in the sense that you just look into the market and you have complete information in the sense that you know that, okay, this is essentially the price and I know all these players, okay? You know, this is not realistic at all, but economists would argue that this is a very good starting point. And essentially, we should aim to achieve it, this perfect competition, because it is a process in which the price would be equal to marginal cost. And if people try to reduce the cost, then the price would be following. And when the price go down, we as consumers will benefit, right? Because we have so many alternatives. But you know that in reality, it's not always true. And essentially, it is always wrong. Because not all products are homogeneous, right? Products are so heterogeneous, they're so different. Or you don't have perfect information. When you come into the market, you don't really see all the players. You don't really know the prices, right? So most of the time, it's pretty much, you know, the rough idea, and you do see sort of trial and error. But also some consumers would buy from you anyway because they are not perfectly informed either, right? There's free flow of resources, which basically mean that if you want to sell coffee, you can get coffee beans from somewhere, and anybody is the same, which is sometimes not true, right? Because if you need to find out where these coffee farmers are, and you have to negotiate, and you have to have this sort of like bargaining process. This is something that we call transaction cost. It's not that easy, right? And you don't have any barriers to entry or exit, which basically means that if you want to buy coffee, you want to sell coffee, you can do it right away, right? There's no regulation. You don't have to invest that huge amount of money. You can just buy it and sell it in the markets, which is not true, right? There's so many costs involving, so many regulations involving in so many industries, and upfront investment at times is quite huge. So that you have financial constraint already, right? Rationality. Well, sometimes you're not that rational, right? You don't know that I should sell coffee or I should sell tea, right? You don't know all of this, and you cannot compare all possible alternatives and choose the right one. And sometimes you don't even maximize profit, right? There are so many managerial theories which we're going to cover roughly next time, but there's so many ideas how firms actually conduct their business. Some say that they are maximizing their long-term value, not profit, not short-term profit, right? Some say that they are maximizing shareholder values. Some say that they are just a random box where every single big decision is determined by big players. not big players, but by managerial bodies. Okay, and there's no externality in competition, in perfect competition either. Externality is essentially the idea that whatever I do will not affect other competitors, which is untrue, right? Because if I enter the market and I do something, say that I spread the bad news or my product is really bad, right? My coffee is rotten and people drank my coffee and die. Essentially, you're going to create these sort of negative externalities, like you pollute the river and all other coffee producers would get negatively affected as well, right? That is essentially externalities, and it happens. So having said all of these assumptions, violations, it seems to be the case that perfect competition would not really occur. Well, the closest to one is probably the sort of financial market or the market for these sort of very basic commodities, right? But most of the time it's not perfect competition. It's just something that's similar. So many players, quite standard price, products are quite similar across producers. So usually what we see is this oligopoly. We're gonna cover what oligopoly is later, okay? But this is oligopoly basically means that you have just a few players in the market, not that many players, and whatever one player does, that would affect other players as well. Okay. So that's the idea of perfect competition. You've seen it, you understand it hopefully. And then these two guys came. The first one is an Austrian economist, okay, whose name is Friedrich Hayek, and the right one is Joseph Schumpeter. But idea of these two guys are quite well, not really similar, but let me put it this way, that they look at competition not in the sense that it's so static. It is a competition where all players are small. They can't do anything. They just set price equal to their marginal cost, that sort of thing. They believe that competition is essentially a dynamic process. Okay, Hayek believed that competition is like this sort of discovery process where you as a firm is trying to look out into the market and try to be at your base. Okay, you sort of try to discover, okay, who are your competitors and what are the prices level out there. I'm trying to be my best. Is there any possible opportunity out there in other markets? So I will enter that market. But if there is no possibility here, should I exit it? So that's sort of process where you keep discovering, right? And Schumpeter says that by having this process, what follows is this thing called creative destruction. Because when you are trying to enter the markets, you come up with new ideas. What happens is that the incumbent or the existing player in a particular market, you see Nokia, right? Nokia used to be the largest mobile phone producers in the world. But by almost just a decade afterwards, Nokia went bankrupt. And that is because Apple came into the market, introduced a smartphone, right? And Samsung came into the market and introduced this thing. That process of competition is what they call creative destruction, where essentially everyone in the society is better off, because now we have a very good smartphone, very capable, much better than the old days mobile phones produced by Nokia, and actually, but at an expense of Nokia itself, right? So this is why it's called creative destruction, because you really need someone to come and disrupt the industry. So the old player, the big player, would die out, and new technology or new innovation would substitute it. But that is for the better of this whole society. This is why the implication of this is this. This is why so many competitions commission focus really heavily on entry, right? They say that, okay, you could be just a few players, but that is possibly because you have been so successful such that all other competitors of yours had to basically had to go out of business. Okay, but now you are just like a few players left who are really capable and efficient, so you survived. And you should not be punished from doing that, right? So they focus that, okay, as long as you don't do anything to prevent someone to come in and compete against you. So that is why this sort of like dynamic competition has become so more and more important. They don't care that you must have all these many players all the time, because it's impossible. But competition is pretty much the process. Okay. And this is what Josh Hand is the same Josh Hand who introduced the Hand's rule in tort law, where you have this B is greater than PL thing. Okay. And he said that it's a bad idea if you have just only a single firm and you punish this firm by being a monopoly, because it could be that you are the single firm because you have been through this fierce competition and you are the winner because you are so efficient, right? You should not be punished by being so efficient. That's the idea, right? So that's essentially what you can read the slide later, but that's essentially what it is. Okay, so what to regulate, as I said, you have this sort of structure, and structure would influence conduct, and conduct would influence performance, right? You can look at structure, as I said, you can look at the number of firms, size of each player, or you look at the conditions of entry or exit. Is there any regulation controlling the entry or exit? You have to get registered. How long would the registration process last? Or do you have any sort of product differentiation within your industry? Or do you own like along the vertical axis, like you are the owner of supplier, you are the owner of a wholesaler, you are the owner of retailer? If that is pretty much the description of the whole supply chain and the market structure, right? And then there are some sort of warning signs, right? Some signs that you should be worried that if you have just a few players, it is so difficult to enter the market, and that player is actually owning the whole supply chain. Then you would say that, oh, given this structure, it is really likely that this player would conduct in a way that against the competition or against the well-being of the society. Okay, and this is essentially the last topic of today, because what you're trying to control is that you would like to achieve certain goals, right? Competition is essentially, okay, you want to increase competition, but for what? You must sort of set these sort of objectives clearly. And there are a few objectives here, all right? One thing is efficiency or productivity. You can aim for that as well. You say that I want to increase competition because I want firms to compete and I want them to have incentive in order to improve their production process. You want them to have incentive to invest in technology, right? To hire the base minds, so that they would be able to produce more in a given period, right? These two concepts are, you can think about this as efficiency is essentially when you can produce certain thing using the least inputs possible. All right, you can produce certain things. You want to produce like 100 tons of coffee or 100 tons of products, or you want to provide like legal service to your client in the shortest amount of time, right? Using the least amount of input, say using just one person, or like the least hours of a lawyer in order to produce certain amount of output. That is efficiency, right? You try to minimize the input in order to achieve certain goal. Productivity is the other way around, where you would like to put certain input and you want to get the most out of it. Okay, so these two concepts are actually just a mirror image of each other. All right, there are a few kinds of efficiency here. The first kind is allocative efficiency, which basically means that now you have this sort of resources, right? You have like money, you have humans. Human are resources as well, that we call human resources. You have this sort of money, you have capital, you have well, lands. These are resources, and what an economy trying to achieve, one of the goals that economy trying to achieve is to allocate this resource, right? You would like a land to be used by someone who can produce the most out of it, right? That is allocative efficiency. You want a land to be owned by someone who can maximize the value, and that is essentially why you have sort of a land tax, right? Because if you cannot use it as productive as the other one, you don't want to pay tax. So you would sell it to someone else who can actually produce it and make it more productive. Yeah, so that's allocative in the sense that you create some mechanism in order for people to change hands, right? For these resources to change hands. Competition is one of the process as well, right? You sort of like stimulate competition. So if a firm is unable to compete against other firms, you just go out of business, and you release your capital, you release your people, and your people would go to do something that is more efficient. Okay. Productive efficiency is what I said. You sort of like trying to reduce your cost to be as low as possible, right? Because that basically means that you will be able to compete against your other firms, right? And dynamic means that you sort of like, okay, at the current state, if you probably there are some inefficient firms, right? Some smaller firms who is not achieving this sort of scale sufficient to be profitable, but you want to preserve the smaller firms because you know that in the long run where the market demand is growing, you need more players, and these smaller firms would create technology, would be able to challenge larger firms, because if you let these smaller firms leave the market, then the larger firm would not have an incentive to develop in the future, even though it is more efficient now, because they are efficient, right? Because they are like, they have scales and such. But if you let this smaller firm leave the market, then essentially what would follow is, in the longer run, these larger players will not have incentive to develop any further, because you don't have any pressure from the smaller firms, right? So yeah, that's the idea of dynamic competition, where you prioritize a sort of long run productivity growth, even though in the short run it might not be the most efficient or productive alternative. Okay, so that's essentially productivity. Sorry, welfare. This is important. This is essentially the most important concept in objective setting in terms of competition law. Welfare is like this. You can think of this as, if you have ever done economics 101, I believe all of you have done economics in your second year, right? And there is a certain level of price. I mean, ignore these graphs first, but there is a certain level of price, okay, that you can sell the product. The idea of this welfare, which we will come back to touch on it later, is this. As a consumer, right? Let's say this is a piece of this. Let's say this is a piece of computer, right? One computer is your product. Well, there could be some people in the society who is willing to pay more for this computer. Let's say it is Mr. A here. Mr. A is willing to pay more for this computer because he is a big fan of Apple, right? He want to use MacBook. He want to be the first, and he is quite wealthy. So he is probably willing to pay a really high price for this Apple, say like 10,000 US dollars for this MacBook, which he can afford, and he really want to. That is his willingness to pay, right? If you launch it and you set the price at 10,000, maybe this one guy would be the only customer that you would have. And there are some other consumers who is willing to pay a slightly lower price, but still be willing to pay more, right? Quite not more, but quite at a high level price. Say at like 8,000, right? And you could imagine that, okay, there are some consumers who is essentially not willing to purchase at the market price now, because let's say that the market price of Apple is like, say, £1,000. Sorry, 1,000 baht. No, 1,000 US dollar. Okay. In this case, it means that those consumers, let's say Mr. B here, who is willing to pay just less than that, would not be able to afford, right? But so essentially what happened in reality is this Mr. B won't purchase Apple, okay? But Mr. C here, who is willing to buy at 1,000 baht, would be able to buy it because the willingness to pay is essentially equal, okay? So let's say that the market price, the price tag that is put in the Apple shop is 1,000 US dollar. You can see that Mr. A would buy it anyway because it's cheaper than the prices he's willing to pay. And these guys here, no matter how many they are, will buy it. And they enjoy some benefit here, right? Because actually the level that they are willing to pay is greater than the level that they can actually pay for it, right? This Mr. A actually enjoyed this much because it's like $1,000 different between the real value that that he valued this Apple MacBook, which is 10,000, but he actually paid for it just for 1,000. Okay, and now this person would enjoy this. You can think of it as like enjoy this like 9,000 benefit, right? And that same logic goes to every single one here. But this guy actually willing to pay this much, 8,000, but pay just 1,000, so enjoy like 7,000. So you can think of this as this welfare, right? You can think of it as welfare, or sometimes you call it surplus, because it's something that you enjoy. And this bit is actually called consumer surplus, right? The lower the price, the more surplus the people enjoy, consumers enjoy, because there are some consumers who are willing to pay greater than the market price. Okay, but okay, let's look at the supplier side. With supplier, with okay, there must be some supplier who is really efficient and who is willing to sell this machine for, say, like 200, but very efficient, or crazy or what, but that producer is willing to pay, willing to sell this MacBook for 200, okay, this computer for 200, and there are some producers or firms who are willing to pay at slightly higher price, all right, and there must be a seller who is willing to sell at 1,000 as well. And likewise, there is a producer who is willing to sell at the prices is much higher than that, 10,000. But what happened is that this seller or this producer won't be able to sell a product, right? Because the market price is like 1,000. So they would just keep themselves out of the market. It means that if the market price is really 1,000, what happened is this producer would actually just give him to the $100, he would be more than happy to sell it. But because the market price is 1,000, so this producer would enjoy the benefit here, right? Of like what? I'm sorry, it's gonna be 980, right? You can see here, like you actually enjoy the benefit because you're willing to say you're willing to sell at just 200, but the market price is like 1,000. And the same logic applies to every single producers out there, because you ask them to actually stand in line, right? Ordering from the one who's willing to sell at the lowest price to the one who's willing to sell as the most expensive price. Okay, so this bit, if you sum all of this benefit that the producer enjoy, you can call all of them as producer surplus. Right? Producer surplus, because it is something that you get because you are actually willing to sell at a lower price, but because I mean consumers are willing to pay even more, so you actually enjoy his welfare. Okay, and the sum of these two bits are called total surplus. So by looking at this framework, you can see now that if you sort of like aim at consumer surplus, what would you do? I know that we are now at 5 p.m. already, but this is the last topic. What would you do if you want to focus on consumer surplus from this framework? What you want to do?
Increase the price.
If you wanna increase consumer surplus, what you want to increase the price?
Oh no.
Okay, let me try to suppose that you increase the price, right? Say that you increase the price. It could be because of demand is, but what it means is that if you increase the price for some reason, it means that these consumers who is actually willing to pay this much would enjoy less welfare, right? Because now this consumer has to pay more than 1,000, and the gap between the willingness to pay, the value that consumer has, and the real price would be smaller, and it means that the welfare would be less. But the question is, if you would like to maximize consumer surplus, which direction of price you should actually push the price to?
So it will be reduce the price.
Right. Yeah, you want to reduce the price, right? You know the consumers want to pay less. Or you can think of this as like you want consumers to actually to enjoy more benefits from quality, right? And you can think of this idea of like having greater quality. One way to represent it is to say that for every single level of price, let's say that now we have these this much consumers, right? Because if we say that given this quality at this level of price of 8,000, now you have these consumers who are willing to pay at this level of price, because the one who actually value more would be willing to pay as well. But if you improve the quality, it basically means that you should have more people who are willing to pay at the same level of price, right? Because say that now I have like a phone, like just a mediocre model to you, and you say yeah, maybe 10 of us would be willing to pay at like 2,000 baht, okay, for example. And I say that now this is the higher quality, like the flagship model, but the same price, 2,000 baht. It is sensible to say that there must be more than 10 people who are willing to pay for it, right? And that basically means that this price should shift here to the right. but that logic applies to all cases. So it basically means that the demand has to be here, and it basically means that if you improve the quality, then people would enjoy more what? They would enjoy consumer welfare as well, right? Because now they will be willing to pay even more for the same product. So when you talk about the objective of competition, one thing that you need to prove if your competition commission cares about consumer welfare, something that you need to prove is that you are not increasing the price or reducing the quality of the product, because that is where the consumer welfare lies. But if the other way around, if you care about producers as well, then you might have sort of put more weight on the ability of firms in order to for them in order to invest, right? You might sort of like bear some level of increase in price, because you know that having a price increase, firm would be able to gain more profit and be able to invest afterwards. Okay, so or if you care about both, you would say that, okay, we care about both consumers and producers, and what we're trying to do is we have to wait between these two welfares. That is possible as well. Okay, I think that's pretty much what it is, and I will cover briefly just the remaining two topics of fairness and equity and the social, political, and environmental reasons, because they are sort of less important in practice. Essentially, what Competition Commission would care about when it comes to the objective of competition law are these efficiency and productivity and also welfare. Okay. All right. I think that's it for today's session. Do you have any question? Okay. Okay, so just to wrap up, what we have done is essentially, right, we have learned this sort of quick tour of TCA, right? We know that what are the conducts that are governed by TCA, and we also know that there's this sort of relationship between the structure of the market, the way the payer are situated, and the conduct, whether they would do something bad or not. Okay, and then we learn this sort of trade-off between incentive and capability. And then we talk about that the competition is not, it could be seen from the very static point of view, where you have so many players at the moment and every single moment, or it could be seen as a process in which new players come in, existing player would die out, and you can always challenge a bigger player, and you give rewards to some bigger player who has been through this sort of fierce competition and become the survivor, right? And objectives, we covered two important objectives. The first thing is efficiency and productivity, and the second thing is welfare. You've learned what it means by consumer welfare, what it means by producer welfare, and what it means by the sum of both. And these objectives would be sort of like a compass that would guide the way the Competition Commission regulate the competition within the market. All right, so next time we will start the microeconomics. You're going to learn basic idea of economics, and I think that's going to be really helpful in the long run. So I'll see you next week, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'll see you. So have a good week ahead and see you next week. ขอบคุณมากครับ
Thank you.
Welcome.
ครับ
ขอบคุณครับ
Bye bye.
Thank you, Ajan. Bye.
Bye byeครับ